China in particular is not going to come seamlessly into the Washington Consensus and into the Bretton Woods system. Perhaps that's appropriate. These institutions were largely developed by Western powers in the post-World War II period. We need growth now that's not just growth at all costs, not always cheaper is better, not always thinking about cheap clothing made with slave labor or, environmental standards that don't take into account the fact that coal-produced electricity has a carbon cost for the world. We need growth that is sustainable, meaning we probably need to put some kind of a price on carbon at some stage or come up with a mechanism for dealing with carbon, and is equitable, meaning you're putting a floor under labor standards. You simply can't compete in markets where you have subsidized labor, substandard labor, and environmental standards that don't take into account the entire cost of a product. And that's the direction we're going, and it's a good direction.
大家好，欢迎来到烽火的频道。本期视频分享的是高志凯参加一期电视连线的采访节目。节目中围绕中美半导体的竞争和全球供应链的变化展开激烈的讨论。当然，按照国际惯例，总少不了带有西式意识形态的偏见的嘉宾来参加。比如这位美国作家和金融时报的副主编拉娜福鲁哈尔。气氛当然不会太友好。拉娜说中国不会融入二战后建立的华盛顿共识和布雷顿森林体系。当然意思就是说你中国不合群呗。其次他说中国的服装等产品都是使用奴工制造的。还指出中国的经济增长是建立在破坏环境和碳排放之上的。当然拉娜还暗指中国没有民主价值观和自由价值观，可谓是语不惊人死不休节目中高志凯也都对相关的问题进行了沉着有力的回应。节目最后拉娜还希望高志凯带她去新疆看看。你真想去看的话，还有谁能拦着你吗？阻止你吗？好的，废话不多说我们一起来看一看视频。
States want to have two supply chains for semiconductors, one centered on the U.S. and other led by China.
The U.S. is definitely interested in developing supply chains that are robust and resilient with partners that share its values, democratic values, liberal values. It's interesting because Catherine Tai, who's the U.S. TR, has spoken of a post-colonial trade paradigm. And I really quite like that phrase because, again, if you think about how trade has worked for so many decades and indeed many hundreds of years, it's often been controlled by a handful of powerful forces, be it countries or companies. And so the idea now, not just thinking about the U.S. or China, but thinking about the global North and the global South, how can we make sure that all countries have an equal stake and equal share in the system? How can we make sure that things are not extractive? So I think the flaw, I'll be honest, the flaw in the first Trump administration was that they simply used tariffs as the sole tool in the arsenal. And tariffs are not that. You have to have a competitive strategy at home if you want to succeed, right? I mean, every country knows that. I think the Biden administration has said, look, we are going to use tariffs where appropriate when we feel that they're non-WTO compliant, non-fundamentally fair market practices in play, and that's okay. But we also have this incredibly elaborate industrial strategy that we're developing in the U.S., which is creating certain manufacturing hubs, often in areas that have been less economically advantaged. So it's about balancing wealth and dealing with inequality as well. It's about working into issues like 21st century labor training. It's about, as we just discussed, trying to find new ways to interact with partners abroad. So there's a lot of difference, I think, between the two approaches that Biden and Trump have taken.
So, Akira, how do you see the semiconductor industry changing from your point of view?
Semiconductor market last 30 years, 40 years was driven by the personal computer, smartphone, and flat TV, that type of the consumer goods. From now, every country already announced to succeed the GX, carbon neutral policy. That will be driven by the government. New market will start from now. Semiconductor industry growth rate will be increased. Of course, the supply and demand balance is important. Every country is support subsidy to develop the semiconductor industry now. That is maybe over investment and oversupply.
Right. So you're saying that in the future, semiconductor industry will not be, motivated by consumption, but more of government policy. Right. So Huang Wen, what do you say to that?
My opinion is that global industry supply chain will change a lot in the future because of the U.S. and the China trade war. Some, I have to say, many foreign investments have withdrawn from China, including many Taiwanese design and packaging manufacturers. China has to independently develop various advanced processes and technologies. I think all countries will face challenge, but in China, the challenges are even greater. Every country do what they do best. Yeah, but right now, China has to do all the things. That will be very difficult and challenging. Yeah.
So, Victor, what do you say to that?
The panelists just now said the U.S.-China semiconductor war. No, it's U.S. war of semiconductors against China. It's one directional. It's not bi-way or two-directional. And allow me to add a very quick point. I listened very carefully to what the distinguished panelists from the United States said, and with due respect to her, allow me to make one point. If she is really serious about values, etc., she should go to the White House and try her best to convince President Biden to approve Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel. No one says that Japan and United States do not have a lot of values very similar, if not identical to each other. So why should the United States deny Nippon Steel's bid to buy U.S. Steel, which is on sale? And I truly believe no one in Japan would ever forget that it was the United States which plunged the Japanese semiconductor industry from the pinnacle of the industry to the low end and never recovered from the highs in the 1980s. I think every country needs to do what is best for itself, considering its own independence and using its own brain power to make the decision, rather than being dictated by any other country in the world. And globalization is still the best path going forward. All of us need international cooperation. No one should indulge in the fantasy that by dictates, it can change the supply chain in the world, which has been built up for decades.
Rana, you had something to say?
Yeah, I just want to respond to the gentleman from China's point about Nippon Steel, which I actually think is a good point.
Yeah.
And in fact, I wrote a column arguing that that the U.S. and the Biden administration should have let that deal go through. Now, let me explain, though, why it didn't happen. That deal didn't go through only because this is an election year. And it's a huge election year, an election that matters enormously, not just for the U.S., but for the world. The Biden administration needs steelworkers, and he needs Pennsylvania. It's a swing state. Why does he need labor right now? Why does he need those swing states in the hollowed out Rust Belt? Because of the bad decisions that the U.S. made to let the entire industrial commons go overseas, and largely in big chunks of it to China. That was not a good decision for national interests. Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor in the U.S., gave a speech last April. And he said, look, we've reached a turning point. It's very clear that the world is not...
So, Victor, what do you say to that? So, the U.S. does not want to repeat what it experienced with the steel industry against China.
I was full attention listening to the distinguished panelist from the United States. Allow me to raise one objection. She said substandard labor in China. The Chinese labor is up to any standard in the world. The Chinese workers work really very hard, and they make huge sacrifices.
They're underpaid, and they're not treated well.
Standard. They are treated well. And you can come over to visit us, and I hope I will help you to escort you on many of these visits. Using your own eyes will help you.
I hope you'll take me to Xinjiang. I hear it's pretty difficult for journalists to get in there, though.
Xinjiang borders with Afghanistan and has suffered 20 years of the spillover of radicalization from Afghanistan in a war of 20 years led by the United States against Afghanistan. The repercussion is still there. We hope it will recover.
It's about China exporting its own problematic negative externalities of its own model to the rest of the world, and it's unacceptable.
I hope you will do your real homework and visit Xinjiang before you make such representations.
Okay, let's get back to semiconductor industry for now, okay? So, do you think there will be two separate supply chains for the semiconductor industry? Akira?
Yeah, I think so. That is the current situation, yes.
Hong-Wen?
Yeah, just Akita-san mentioned, because I cover LED display industry for many years. In China, government subsidize many companies to compete with other vendors in other countries. They have, China is a very big country, so they have a lot of resources and people. So if they focus on some industry, even United States or other companies cannot compete with them. China subsidize, China expend a lot of money in the industry. Yeah, so a lot of other Asian company cannot compete with them.
Victor, what do you say to that?
Well, when we talk about subsidies, look at how the United States government is subsidizing the semiconductor industry. Don't be fooled by what you want to believe. Look at what's happening just in front of our eyes. Subsidies for Boeing, subsidies for Airbus, subsidies for the agricultural products. When you talk about subsidy, open your eyes. There are many ways, many forms of subsidies by different countries, including by the biggest economy in the world.
Okay, so I think we should wrap up now. So in view of all the discussions we've had, what is your biggest concern about the semiconductor industry, and do you see any positive signs in the future? Victor.
I believe after the chips war is over, the world will still be one world, and globalization being pushed to 2.0 will continue. And the Cold War mentality eventually will not generate any benefit for any country. The world is big enough to accommodate both a very successful United States and a successful China. At the same time, China and the United States are not opposite against each other. And I believe China and the United States will eventually get along with each other and become two major engines for the growth of the world economy in the future.
Rana?
I think that one of the big challenges to reindustrialization and creating more resiliency and more nodes of production is that it takes time, right? Building a chips industry is a years-long, decades-long project, and there's a lot that can happen in the world between now and the next 10 or 20 years. And so we have to just stay focused on the future, stay focused on the big goal, keep our eyes on the prize. That can be difficult sometimes in the U.S. because we have a liberal democracy, and like it or not, elections are part of that.
好了，视频看完了，不知道大家看完视频有什么样的感受啊？拉娜呀， 作为一名作家和金融时报的副主编，他所从事的工作本应该是极其严谨的，但是大家看到他依然在节目当中罔顾事实的大放厥词，竟然用奴工这个词来侮辱中国广大的劳动者。烽火认为在中国波澜壮阔的发展历程当中在改革开放经济的发展初期，的确广大的劳动者工人的工作环境劳动待遇确实不怎么样，这也是事实。但是哪个国家的发展不经历这个阶段呢？何况随着经济的持续发展，现阶段中国的劳动者工人的工作环境早已今非昔比，已经有了非常巨大的改善。你去看一看，绝大多数的厂里面都配备了空调，工作环境也都是干净卫生。怎么就成为你口中的奴工了呢？怎么就成为你口中的强迫劳动呢？说到碳排放，哪个国家在发展不经历碳排放这个阶段？美国也曾经历过，何况2020年9月22日，中国在75届联合国大会上明确地提出，力争在2030年前实现二氧化碳的碳排放达峰，2060年前实现碳中和，为世界的气候改善负起应有的大国责任。节目当中在谈到半导体产业高志凯说呢，我深信所有的日本人都不会忘记，正是美国将日本的半导体产业从行业的巅峰推至低谷。高志凯这个话是说给日本嘉宾和日本民众听的，果然姜还是老的辣。节目中拉娜还希望高志凯能带他去新疆去看一看，不过他也说了一句他说我听说记者很难进去。我估计他所有的关于新疆的消息、强迫劳动的消息都是听说来的。高志凯也没有留情，怼了他一句，说希望您在说话的时候做好功课。关于半导体产业以及芯片的竞争烽火在此也想说一说自己的看法。当今世界正处于信息革命、人工智能变革时期，半导体产业和芯片就是信息革命和人工智能的基础设施。谁掌握着半导体产业和芯片，谁就有机会赢得信息革命。谁赢得信息革命谁就能够赢得未来。所以芯片战的背后逻辑呢，不是中美之间简单的产业之争，而是中美在竞争未来，在竞争明天。如果你赞同烽火的论点呢，那就不难看出中美的半导体产业和芯片的争夺战是不死不休的局面，完全没有合作和休战的可能的。如果有，那一定是双方掌握的资源实力能够暂时的达到平衡，比如中国的稀土产业的制裁。好了，本期视频就分享到这里，如果大家喜欢的话，就订阅一下烽火的频道吧。烽火在此感谢